Hello and welcome to the myfatfact podcast. myfatfact was created to make your life better by simply making it healthier. We are a team of young health professionals that turn medical literature into the entertaining, the personalized, the 160 character or less Fat Fact. This podcast is designed to analyze the current medical literature in a way that leaves you beyond satiated with the conclusions invaginated into your mind forever, because knowledge is power, and my Fat Fact is powerful knowledge. I am your host, as always, Zachary Conklin. I am a competitive bodybuilder. I have a degree from the University of Buffalo. I do some fitness modeling. I am also almost done with my chiropractic education at New York Chiropractic College. Started my Fat Fact a few years ago, and we are just trying to help you out as listeners and give you what we do every day, which is study the human body. And I will now hand this over to Cameron Brown, who's my co-host, editor-in-chief at My Fat Fact, Cameron Brown.
Thank you very much. Always enjoy doing these. I'm super pumped to be back here. Super pumped to get back at this again as break is slowly finishing up, and I was starting to lose my mind there. I'm glad we got some research and some work to do over the next little bit. Like Zach said, my name's Cameron. I'm editor-in-chief of the website right now. I am a classmate and colleague of Zach's. I'm also finishing up my doctorate at New York Chiropractic right now. Be going to spend a little bit of time at the Rhode Island Institute of Spine soon, coming up with Dr. Donald Murphy, and hopefully get some time in at Brown Medical School there as well. After that, I'm looking to pursue my PhD. General strength enthusiast, lover of scotch, long walks on the beach, and all that good stuff.
Yes, my man loves his literature and his scotch and long walks on the beach with me.
So really excited to do this. Let's get going on this.
Yeah, all right. Today's Fat Fact that we're going to be discussing is one that you wrote about a year ago when this literature came fresh to our minds. It's a little bit eye-opener, and it's a little bit of contradictory to what you would normally think. So here it goes. Calcium supplements could kill you. Calcium supplementation is not a good way to prevent osteoporotic fractures, and instead may even kill you. Know the Fat Facts. Now, Cameron, when you wrote this, did you write this shortly after you came across this literature? Because when I read things like this, it definitely sparks holy shit. My mom, my sisters are on calcium supplements. What do you got to say about that?
Yeah, I definitely had one of those holy shit moments as well. I came across this. I believe the first time I came across it was in another podcast called Clinical Conversations with Joe Elia, and they look at a bunch of different literature. It's actually really well done. For any of our more kind of health-oriented listeners out there, I'd encourage you to check that out as well. But yeah, I heard the author, Dr. Reed, speak on it, and then went and checked out the paper myself, and was exactly that, kind of blown away, going, oh my God, this definitely changes a lot. And although there's been some, debate over the literature itself, which we'll get into a little bit, but came across it about a year ago, and forever since have try to spread the word a little bit. Yeah,
right. This literature, you say, I feel like there's so many papers out there that are kind of contradictory to each other. But how does this one hold its ground, and why is this one so important? What was done so well, and why are we really kind of talking about this today?
Good question. And I guess I've kind of heard this argument from a couple of people, or I guess the same question is just, all right, well, why all of a sudden the change now? I thought up until this time calcium was a great solution to osteoporosis, a great way to keep our bones strong and whatnot. And people were really kind of taking it, on an article of faith almost, because the literature really never did back it up too strongly. There is some stuff out there, but when you really break down the studies, it's not that strong. And after, I think Dr. Reed's group kind of actually stumbled upon this, and they really weren't looking for this, but after analyzing their data, came across some pretty remarkable findings. So this is just a huge study, and I'll break it down for us a little bit later. I guess first we'll probably just touch on some, what is calcium, how does it work, and all that stuff. But
yeah, exactly. Then why don't you get into the physiology a little bit, and why did we think that supplementing with calcium would be a good idea?
When it first started, I think it was more just it seemed like common sense. I mean, we're obviously all aware of calcium and phosphate, in our bones, and I think it was more just, all right, well, dwindling calcium levels maybe in our old age is what's contributing to, osteoporotic fractures and decreased bone health. But it never really panned out that way. But, we all know calcium, is regulated pretty tightly in the body. Extracellular calcium really, is kept pretty close, in a pretty close window. I think in total body levels, Guyton and Hall quoted at 2.4 millimoles per liter. However, only about 50% of that is actually usable ionic calcium. And long story short, hypercalcemia, we've always known, depresses the nervous system. Hypocalcemia excites the nervous system. We know we got our osteoclasts and our osteoblasts in the bone. Clasts kind of eat everything up. Osteoblasts are our builders. And, the calcium ions that are the active form are the only ones that are really usable. That's about kind of half. 50% of the total calcium floating around, and that's about 1.2 millimoles. So it's really kept pretty tight. And
the serum levels are what's kept really tight, right?
Right. Yeah. So, even serum levels, serum.
Serum levels, and then your body will sacrifice its bone structure in order to keep serum levels, blood levels.
Right,
steady.
Exactly. And it now appears that, or I guess it's kind of still hypothesized a little bit, but even if you mess with those serum levels low or high, it appears like there's some pretty drastic changes in bone health overall as well. So,
even if they're within normal limits, right?
Well, I think even with dietary calcium, and we'll get into that a little later with the second kind of study that I'm going to draw everyone's attention to, that even is a little more scary for me, because it was actually just done with dietary calcium, and I don't think we've spoken about it too much beforehand, but it was another study out of Europe, actually. Well, I guess not Europe, out of Sweden, and some really cool stuff. So we'll get into that.
Yeah. So I guess we could sum up why we're actually supplementing with calcium in the first place. It's because if we're not getting enough dietary calcium, it would make sense to increase your calcium intake via supplementing. And as most of you know, or can at least conceptualize, that supplements, drugs, anything in pill form, anything man-made isn't the way it looks like in nature, and the body may not absorb it or utilize it like it would if it did come from nature. So I think this study here does conclude that dietary calcium intakes do not... Am I killing your thunder here about the conclusions of this study? But
No.
I think it's just important. I think that's really where the underlying factor is that it's not natural. Calcium supplements just simply aren't natural, and they don't really work that well.
Yeah, the first study we'll take a look at, and I can even get into it right now.
Why don't you go ahead?
Definitely
get into this.
Sure, definitely showed that calcium supplements are a bad idea. We'll talk about a second study which was done, not too long after this, or published not too long after this, that even shows that even dietary calcium potentially might even have some dangers. But calcium supplementation. So at the University of Auckland, Dr. Ian Reid, who's a professor of endocrinology there, him and his team basically reanalyzed a whole bunch of data from the Women's Health Initiative, which was a giant prospective cohort of women followed over umpteen years, and they basically tracked a whole bunch of stuff to try and just get some good epidemiological data, if you may. And basically what they kind of came across is that the initial study that was done on this, half the women at the time of randomization were actually taking personal calcium supplements on their own. So, if you kind of think about that just from a logical common sense standpoint, if you're going to randomize two different groups and you're going to assign a intervention, in this case calcium supplementation, and see what it does. Does it prevent fracture? Does it give you heart attacks? Does it do whatever? You got to have you got to have both groups even. You got to you can't have people taking it already. At that randomization, it's got to be kind of ground zero. So what they found is a lot of these women were already taking personal calcium supplements, and when they removed those women from the data set and reanalyzed it, still in a prospective nature, and it was a really well done study and really well carried out, there definitely was a risk So initially the data didn't show a risk, and when they reanalyzed the data, they definitely showed that there is
risk.
indeed a risk.
What's the risk? What are we having a risk for?
Myocardial infarction and stroke. So cardiovascular events.
Some vascular event.
Yep, definitely some sort of vascular event. So they did a really great job of doing this. After they reanalyzed the data, they added in 7 more of the largest trials ever conducted on calcium supplementation, analyzed the risk with that. Essentially, a meta-analysis then at that point. And in the end, things didn't look so good. There was definitely about a 25% risk in the increased risk of heart attack and about a 15% increased risk of stroke in the people randomized to calcium supplementation. And that did not matter whether or not they were taking vitamin D with it. So I know there's going to be a lot of listeners out there who are going to question that, but there was no protective effect of vitamin D. And I know a lot of people kind of think maybe that was, I've kind of heard that argument in the past, but that's not true. According to this data, that does not really pan out.
Because vitamin D does help with gut absorption of calcium and the actual utilization when it comes to constructing organic bone matter.
And I think we're still just only now scratching the surface of vitamin D to begin with, but I won't even get into that. But so really clever study done by Dr. Reed and his group, and definitely brought to light some potential serious harm to people taking calcium supplements. And again, this comes back to these people aren't taking these for
to feel real good.
Right, exactly. They're not taking them to feel good. This is kind of like they're taking them on a blind article of faith because they think it's going to prevent fractures or help their bones be stronger, which definitely is not the case.
What is the statistic? Fractures versus heart attacks.
We talked about that before. So
there's an actual ratio.
They kind of conclude in the end of the study here that for every 1,000 people you treat with calcium supplementation, for 5 years, you're going to cause about 6 myocardial infarctions or strokes and only prevent 3 fractures. So when you look at the risk-benefit ratio with that is really not too good. Treating 1,000 people for 5 years with calcium supplementation and only preventing 3 fractures, first and foremost, is a pretty shitty, preventative mechanism. Is a pretty bad treatment to begin with. Never mind the fact that the risk ratio is so high for myocardial infarct and stroke.
Amazing. So I'm going to tell my mother that she needs to drop the supplements, drop the calcium supplements, because she's not going to save her hip fracture, and she's more likely to, have some stress and then have a heart attack after it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I have already kind of started, obviously, advising any females in my life, especially the older crowd, aunts, whoever it
perimenopausal women especially.
Yeah, perimenopausal.
Because they're all taking it.
Not a good idea, guys. You definitely need to, first and foremost, get it from your diet. I'll touch on another study, though, which even kind of gives us some guidelines for that. And B, you need to just get in the gym. I mean, I really think getting in the gym is kind of the key here, and we've always talked about that. I mean, physical activity and eating normal, healthy foods pretty much solves every problem.
Yes, but, again, we boil it down to just moving your ass and actually eating something that's real,
and not depending on some sort of supplement for that quick fix. Because apparently, even something as what we thought benign as calcium is definitely still dangerous in a synthesized supplemental form. Not good stuff.
Okay, well, why don't you draw us closer to those conclusions of the other study where they used dietary calcium?
Yeah, so the other study was done by, the primary author is Dr. Eva, I can't even pronounce her last name, Skipbeck or something like that. She's from Uppsala University in Sweden, and so her team did a sub-cohort of a 61,000 person prospective longitudinal cohort out of Sweden, of which they used about 5,000 people, or 5,000, I think it was like 22 people were analyzed on average for about 19 years. So they're using food frequency questionnaires when they do this type of stuff. So we got to kind of take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But regardless...
Why is that, real quick?
Just because people don't really report they're not really reliable from everything. We've kind of looked into it, I guess, in the scientific realm. When you ask someone what they ate that day, their estimates are typically off. Yeah. So regardless, take it with a grain of salt. But I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire, typically. And basically what they found, bottom line, nothing above 800 milligrams per day made any difference in fracture risk. And also, actually, the highest half, the highest 50%, and the highest quintile, I think for sure, obviously, actually had an increased risk of fracture. They had an increased risk of fracture, and that's dietary calcium. So that's kind of crazy to think about. I mean, I know a lot of whole foods, experts, and probably even you are going to question this, and I fully understand that. And again, like I said, take it with a grain of salt. But it appears like no matter what, if you can keep your serum calcium levels elevated, you're really messing with your system. Calcium apparently has a pretty small window, and whether you mess with it supplementally, which definitely seems like a bad idea, or you mess with it even with just too much in your diet, it appears you're at risk of something bad happening. Supplements seem to cause cardiovascular events, and way too high dietary intake seems to put you at a greater risk of fracture.
No kidding.
So, yeah, some pretty crazy stuff coming out of that study, too. And again, a really well-conducted cohort there. So, two of the biggest and definitely most influential studies in the area right now.
So, where do you think that, I guess people are taking dietary or supplemental calcium based on the idea that if I have more calcium in my diet, I'm not going to have a fracture. But was there ever any evidence, is there ever any studies done proving that, dietary or supplemental calcium actually does prevent osteoporotic fractures?
That's a really good question. I've kind of asked around for everyone that I know with any data on this, and I really haven't got anything concrete back in that neighborhood. I know the epidemiological data, which is a lot of cross-sectional and observational stuff, has some positive correlations with dietary calcium and obviously decreased risk. But a lot of that data you got to be really careful when you're looking at, because it's got a lot of confounding factors, and a lot of those, maybe those people who are eating a lot of calcium to begin with, which might be coming typically from your greens and stuff like that. We'll talk about that later. They're probably the ones that are already, more likely to work out anyways. And maybe if you don't, compare your groups accurately, you get some skewed statistics there. But I haven't specifically seen anything. That's a really good question. But again, Dr. Ava's study, if you go too high, it still doesn't look good, even if it's just from your diet. Okay. It still looks like it has some sort of increased risk factor.
So if we take Dr. Reed and Dr. Ava's studies, we can say that these ones are probably the best studies done since, Western medicine and science has existed on dietary and supplemental calcium.
I would have to say so, yes. I'm probably going to get some argument on this, but the amount of people, the amount of patient years, or person years that they witness between the two of these is huge. It's huge. You're never going to see a bigger trial than this, because now that there's some hesitation, they won't put a randomized control trial together and all of a sudden go, okay, we'll randomize one group to taking calcium on the potential that they might have a heart attack or stroke. Yeah, so you're not going to see it anymore. No review board or IRB board or whoever is going to approve anything like that. So I really think people, although there's been arguments, and there was like 38 responses to Dr. Reed's paper, I think, in BMJ, and people arguing the statistical analyses and this and that, and there was a consistently good response from Dr. Reed's group, and it's a pretty strong study. A lot of people. Dr. Ava's work was really well done out of Sweden. You gotta take it for what it is, man. I mean, you gotta just deal with this right now. Again, where there's smoke, there's typically fire. Right. So.
Do you think that people who aren't getting enough calcium in their diet are more likely to have an osteoporotic fracture?
That's another awesome question. In short, yes, but I think the levels of calcium that you need are a lot lower than what we think here in North America. I think a lot of the world, and if you look at kind of, again, the epidemiological data, a lot of the world survives on calcium of 400 or even below. Yeah. And we're all hell bent on getting a gram or more a day. It's like, all right, I think we've definitely overdone it here. I think people need to kind of wake up here and go, I definitely don't need a gram of calcium. I definitely do not need it in supplement form for sure. And even dietarily, I definitely don't. I'm not getting any benefit from what appears to be over 800 milligrams. So why don't you take me through exactly what would be, I guess, a good way to get 800 milligrams from my diet, maybe give me some food choices or stuff here. This is definitely more your expertise than mine. You're kind of the, Whole Foods guru here.
Love the Whole Foods. It's all we need to eat. Yeah, Food is medicine, absolutely.
Take me through it. Let me know. Give me some examples.
Well, just to start, everybody knows that dairy has calcium in it. And, if you aren't a big fan of dairy, definitely recommend the plant milks. Plant milks have equal, or even some plant milks actually, almond milk, hemp milk, have slightly more than skim milk as far as dietary calcium goes. You're looking at about 300 milligrams for a cup of all of those three said. So right there in the morning, you got your cup of milk. I love hemp milk. Have you had hemp milk?
I actually have never tried it. Tell you the truth.
Oh my God,
I don't think I've ever actually had it.
Try hemp milk if you haven't had it yet.
I like hemp, so I'll definitely try the hemp milk.
Okay. 1 tablespoon of Parmesan cheese. Throw it on the salad at lunchtime. 70 milligrams. Bam.
Now, we talked about this earlier. Well, I guess you've kind of touched on it a couple times. But I mean, dairy again. We're talking cheese. Is it a good choice? You tell me.
Well, I think in moderation, a little bit, it's going to be okay. I stay away from it as much as possible. I don't drink a whole glass of regular milk. With cheese, fine cheeses I love really, like exotic French cheeses.
I love the cheese too. That's why I'm asking.
A little bit of wine.
You're kind of the expert.
Yeah, and I do like my Parmesan cheese too.
I hate fucking feeling like the dairy makes you feel, but I
does it
love
blow
cheese.
you up?
Yeah,
blow you up a little bit?
And I get a ton of.
It is inflammatory.
I can feel the systemic inflammation.
Yeah, if you have a glass of milk and notice a stuffy nose at half an hour later, it is from the milk. It's not just because you had a little pollen in your nose. It's the milk.
Yeah, I
drop it. We're the only species that are still sucking off the teat of another mammal, so it's something worth dropping, I think. But green leafy vegetables. Again, how many health-promoting compounds are in green leafy vegetables? We can't even count them. We can't even measure them. But one thing is for sure that they have an abundance of dietary calcium. If you get 2 servings, even if you get 1 serving, you're looking at 150 milligrams per serving. Servings are pretty small. And, a big salad will pretty much get you there, as long as it's not like iceberg lettuce.
Now I'm gonna play devil's advocate here just for a second. This kind of just popped into my mind, and I don't even necessarily even agree with what I'm going to ask, but if you think you can actually overdo green leafy vegetables, according to some of this data, apparently,
I don't think you can. I don't think that's
the research out of Sweden. Like, if you're above 800 milligrams, it appears like you're still actually maybe slowing bone turnover is the hypothesized mechanism.
And that's dietary. What's the dietary measures? Is it milk? Is it?
Well, again, no.
They probably didn't have somebody.
Those were food frequency questionnaires.
Just eat green leafy vegetables. Right? Let's see if you get sick.
I'm just asking your opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think
so.
I don't have access to the actual food frequency questionnaires themselves to know, where the percentage was coming from. Was a lot of it dairy? Was a lot of it green leafy vegetables? But I'm just kind of curious myself. Do you really?
First of all, human nature. I don't think you can overdo them because
who
the hell is going to want to?
Can I overdose on broccoli daily? Can I overdose on broccoli daily and get too much calcium? And in turn, increase my risk of fracturing my hip. What do you think?
I think that if you could somehow inject the broccoli into your gut,
I agree.
Possibly. But I think that in nature, there are limiting factors that make things non-addictive, that make things overdo that. You'll become sick to a certain point, and that'll be way before your blood levels ever start changing to the point where it's going to cause some pathological event.
I think I'll have to agree. I just had to ask that.
No, I mean,
again, based on the data, you kind of got to ask that. But I think you're right. I mean, I really don't think I would love to. I mean, I guess my other question. I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but how much broccoli is 800 milligrams? Is that like a bowl and a half, or is that like
I'm
about assuming it's
3 or 4 servings.
Okay, so that's a fair amount.
It's a fair amount, but
that's tough to get over. I don't think I'm getting 5 servings of broccoli daily.
But you got your spinach. Spinach has a little bit more than your broccoli. Kale. I went down this morning to make my omelet, and my parents have a nice, beautiful garden, and picked the vegetables fresh right there, and within 2 minutes of me picking the kale off the stem, I'm cooking it in the omelet. Like, it doesn't get any better than that.
We're only all so lucky. He's bragging now.
I am a little bit, but it's simple and easy, and the seeds for kale are like 90 cents.
No, I agree.
Takes the time, takes the effort. I had to ask. It's true, though. I mean, if you can grow a garden, do it.
So we've got our recommendations. I mean, it obviously sounds like...
Well, seeds and nuts. I want to throw that in there, too.
Okay,
pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, tofu for you soy lovers, and... tofu actually, I'm not a big fan either, but fried tofu actually has close to 400 milligrams. That's half your intake right there. But vegetarians. But vegetarians should never have a problem with calcium.
You would hope
intake.
not. You would hope not. Regardless, I'm going to reserve judgment on that for now.
All right, so let's wrap this up a little bit. What do we got for conclusions here?
So I guess conclusions are, out of Dr. Reed's study, it appears like calcium supplementation, not a good idea. Definitely not. Vitamin D is not protective. You definitely have an increased risk of myocardial infarct or stroke. Bottom line, cardiovascular problems. The study out of Sweden, Uppsala University, Dr. Eva, whatever it was, Skipbeck or something crazy, I still can't pronounce that. Even dietary calcium in the upper echelon, doesn't look like a good idea.
Let's not.
But yeah, let's not split hairs about that. But again, if you want to look at the literature, and this is again, I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate here, but at the same time, just I'm here to present the facts and the research as it is.
You're still presenting moderation with everything,
right.
but nobody there is going to overdo their green leafy vegetables.
Those with the upper quintiles of calcium are definitely at an increased risk of fracture, bottom line. But I guess those would be my two takeaways. I guess, obviously you've hammered home Whole Foods, and I guess we kind of agree on the fact that it's going to be pretty darn hard to overdose on broccoli or some sort of green leafy vegetable, although I'd like to see someone try and do it. But
and I'd like to see probably 90% of you at least increase your green leafy vegetable intake.
Yeah, I got a hard time
you can't
saying
get
don't
enough.
do it because you might kill yourself with the calcium.
I mean, a lot of the anti-inflammatory diets now, and what they're saying is, 5 times a day you could be eating your green leafy veggies. And
definitely could.
Get them if they're at the salad bar, if you're at your grocery store, if you're somewhere. If you're at Subway, crying out loud, don't put the lettuce on, pick the spinach. You're getting so much more bang for your buck there.
Definitely, small choice like that. I like that.
And I guess bottom line is, if you're on calcium supplementations, you really need to consider dropping it and just looking for it in your diet.
Yeah,
that's.
I think overall, I guess I'll put a couple conclusions in here myself, just based on what I've read and the experts that I've listened to. Is right now the North American guidelines are way too high. You definitely don't need that much. A lot of the world survives on a lot less than what we prescribe. And again, you definitely don't want it in supplemental form. So you got to take a serious look. If you're popping a calcium supplement right now, you better not be eating any more throughout the day. And even then, you're probably still at risk. So.
Good stuff. So on behalf of the myfatfact team, which includes over 50 writers now and several good programmers, amazing minds, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to this podcast, and I hope that you can walk away a little bit smarter and subsequently a little bit healthier. Tune in next week's podcast, where we'll have pro bodybuilder Mike Penkin. Awesome guy, a lot of fun. Really looking forward to that one. He also has been writing up a storm on some really interesting and unique type of workouts, variations on everything from bicep curls to squats to leg extension to just some really good stuff. He's doing some good stuff with us. So be sure to like us on the book, follow us on Twitter, myfatfact, all one word, and take care now. Bye-bye.